Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Kellimar audiobook. This is episode 4. We last left Kellimar. He had been found and saved by Tahari and her father Tahar. They had not only taken him in, but had also helped him defeat his captors. Now it seems he's found a new home with beings that are certainly not vampire or human. Only time will tell where this will lead him. Chapter 4. We found our way back through the whispering pines to the nearby cottage rather quickly to assist her father. As it turned out, her kind and mine shared many abilities, from healing, speed, as well as heightened senses. Hers, however, could also turn into beasts. They were stronger, faster, and more bloodthirsty than my kind in that form. As the months went on, I felt something for her. Something unexplainable. Well, at least to me. I had been alive for half a millennia and hadn't known love since I was 11. "Let's talk, shall we, Prince?" she said one day as I entered the dining room. She pulled out a dark wooden chair and sat in one herself. She had the elegance and grace of a queen. Of course, Tahari. I sat down heavily as my body still suffered from the pain of the chains, a pain that would follow me for a year from the day they rescued me. It's simply how it works with the vampire. While we heal immediately, the pain lingers as if to remind me not to be so careless again. Of course, my pain never ended. My war never ended. My sorrow never ended. Tahari smiled and poured a cup of water into a glass. She watched me over the rim as she took a long sip. She then reached into her coat, taking out the note we had found on Crimson's corpse at the height of the last winter. She smoothly and unhurriedly gazed at the simple lines before her. She read quickly and scowled deeper as her eyes reached the end. I wonder if this changes anything. I think before you go looking for your brother, I should explain a few things. I want you to understand our connection without misconceptions or false hopes. You are a means to an end for me, and that end is your father. I loved him in our time, but circumstances pushed us apart. Before I explain anything, and I'm reluctant to even do that, I need some answers from you. Why the fuck weren't you in the cave when he went back for you? She finished her sentence with something very similar to a wolf's snarl on her face. She motioned smoothly with her hand a few inches from my eyes. Within a moment or two, my clenched jaw and deep scowl seemed to loosen on their own. A magic haze fell around me as if I were in green fog. Tahari's cold and hateful eyes watched me as I swayed from the lightheadedness. When my father left, I waited for several days. In the end, I simply gave up hope on him. I thought he was dead, so I moved forward. I went down a road and didn't look back. She glared at me, then took another sip of water. She motioned with her hand to go on. My first kill was a young boy from the village. He was playing in the forest away from the rest. I snapped his neck and ate him. All of him. Even the bones. I ate human too young, and my addiction became unbearable. Withdrawal symptoms getting worse and worse with each passing day, multiplying my pain. The humans hunted me for weeks after the boy's discovery, but I escaped. I grew stronger and kept feeding insatiably compared to a healthy vampire. I found my way through a world that hated me. I was alone. After many cold winters in the wild, I was forced to lodge with anyone who would take me. Horse sheds, pig pens, or the occasional lucky bed or fresh hay pile. When I was in my teens, I'd do farm work in return for food. I paused to accept a glass she handed me. It wasn't a choice, however. I was extremely confused as to why I was explaining all of that to her. All I recall is being lost in a very deep fog, and feeling as if it were all for a good purpose. It wouldn't be long before I learned that charm spells were a novice's trade. Still, it would take a very long time to remember this conversation. I drank deeply from the cup that contained a dark purple liquid. The drink only intensified the green fog that seemed to completely blind me from seeing Tahari at all. I continued on without even realizing I was speaking. I hated cooked meat, but I dealt with it to stay safe and hidden. In the end, I'd always break. The bloodlust would take control and I would kill, sometimes the entire family or village. I realized I was better off alone, killing strangers and not having to look into the eyes of people I had grown to care for. I hated my life, and I wanted to kill myself, but simply couldn't. I held on to the hope that I would find someone or even a purpose. Recently, I decided to go across the ocean, still holding on to that miserable hope. If I didn't find anything, I planned on taking my own life. Then I was captured last autumn, and you know the rest. We sat for a long pause of complete silence. Finally, she set her glass of clear water down and stood. She swiped her hand at the fireplace and a green fire lit. I snapped out of the daze seamlessly, forgetting everything that had occurred instantly. To me, it had been as if she had lit the fire the moment I sat with her at the table. Suddenly the fire sputtered out, and gray and blue smoke filled the room slowly, curling and flowing like water. In fact, I could hear the waves crashing into rocks. I could smell the salt in the air, but it felt wrong. It felt like a different place, unlike anything Earth had to offer. Suddenly I could see a figure looking down the cliff of smoke, a figure that had dark, long flowing hair. She was made of smoke like the rest of the vision, but her eyes were a bright green glow. Suddenly it all disappeared and the smoke changed into a room with a grand table covered in plates and delectable-looking food for a feast. The dark shadow of a woman sat at the head of the table while several beasts kneeled at her feet. Nyx is the mother of my species and the mother of my universe. The smoke curled as the visions of Nyx morphed into a throne room with Tahari bowing before her. The story of how your father and I crossed paths came during Nyx's blessing, some 800 or so years ago. At that time your people were at the twilight of their power. They had unimaginable wonders in their great halls, things that were made from both cunning and magic, working together in ways I had never seen. Tears nearly came to the surface as I watched a vampire child play with a small mechanical toy. I reached a hand out to the figure, only to have the smoke fly apart and morph into a different scene. The vampire consents I wasn't human, and they unerringly determined I came from the other realm. Unlike Nyx, the Creator told them everything, every last bit of history, and they told me what they were willing to say. The Creator knew Nyx's plan, and he had commanded the vampire to be ready for battle, for war. And yet he also commanded them to promote peace if they could. So we met, we spoke, and I left without performing my duties. She finished her glass and let it slip from her hand. It floated off to the next room without dropping an inch. I noticed the cup of purple fluid in my hand and went to take a drink, but before I could, it was plucked from my hand by the same green smoke. The cup went with the other, and she continued before I could protest. Somewhere in the in-between, I was trapped while trying to return to my home. Nyx appeared before me in that empty darkness. I'll never forget the coldness of her voice as she hissed at my failure. She threatened to leave me in the in-between for eternity. I begged for forgiveness, but she is a pitiless monster. In the end, she transported me and condemned me to Tartarus, Nyx's personal hunting grounds. The smoke showed monsters with 7 heads charging at Tahati. Even in beast form, she looked like an ant next to the behemoth as they battled. Then the smoke shifted into Tahati running full speed away from a massive dark figure with deep purple eyes. It went on to show monsters that continued to grow larger and more fearsome than the last. For 100 years I struggled to survive that hell. In the end, Nyx was so impressed with my stubborn survival that she reclaimed ownership of me, as she put it, and brought me back to my people. They feared me and named me Shiphis Teramis, or tormented survivor. Still, I couldn't stand my home anymore, and returned to your universe to see your father again. He had already married and moved on, however, and I was left with nothing but a shack and my less than talkative father for company. I wouldn't see him again until your mother and brother's death. She looked down miserably at the floor as she remembered the day. Their reunion must have happened where we stood at the entryway and library of the cottage. I wanted to ask her to stop, but I was certain it would invoke her rage rather than soothe her. The smoke continued to move into the shape of Tahati and Tahar, looking at a wild-looking, gaunt vampire male. His once proud white braids looked like old soiled straw. Even in the shape of smoke, my father looked more like crimson than he did me. Your father came searching for us. It took him about a month to find us, but when he did, he wasted no time in asking for a portal. He was angry, so desperate for revenge he wanted to challenge Nyx herself. We took care of him as we did you, and I persuaded him not to go by using you. I made him understand how cruel it was to abandon you, and he accepted that fact. He couldn't leave you behind, not even for revenge. When he cleared his head, he went back for you, but to his horror, you were gone. The 3 of us slaughtered the entire village and tortured several humans asking about a young vampire boy. They finally admitted that they had sent parties to hunt you, and we assumed the worst. Your father stole a book of my spells and was gone. We haven't seen him since, but about 3 years ago, I received word from an old friend that he had been captured in the Shadowlands. According to my source, he was trying to find an artifact known as the Helm of Darkness, a helmet that was rumored to have the power of invisibility. Your father hoped that he could use it to rescue your mother and brother's souls from what he called the underworld. He ranted for hours before I could say a word, and at times, as he mumbled on, he referred to this underworld as the Grey Place. My contact in the Shadowlands believed Oberon imprisoned him. My father and I haven't a clue if he's alive or dead. Going into that wretched realm of spiders and freaks is not my idea of a good plan either, but I would travel back to the pits of Tartarus to find him. So you see, my young prince, this is what I meant by your father needing you. With your blood, I can find him. We can bring him home. I can have another chance with him, to see his smile again. With the last words, she began to cry as the smoke floated away through the chimney and into the heavy black clouds that loomed menacingly above. My father will be unconscious for the night, as his shattered skull and shredded brain knit itself back together. We can begin gathering the last ingredient for the portal that we're going to need. Afterwards, I can help you find your brother. Once we find your father and bring him back. After a long pause, I nodded. She smiled at me for the first time since the first weeks I had arrived, but only for a moment before she rushed away. She immediately went out into the night and started making the appropriate markings on the ground. I lay my head back and waited until she emerged through the door with dirt-encrusted nails. The patter of raindrops had just begun to cease when she stepped through the threshold. I've been practicing that symbol for over a century, traveling through your home. I'm going to need to make the symbols perfectly to create a direct portal across this planet. It must be perfect. This world is very withholding of its secrets, but with the right ingredients from my home and yours, wonders can be made. Your father knew this well. He was one of the only vampire alive that could use magic at will on this planet. It was why he loved us so much that I could do it with him, that I could share those abilities with him, even if it led to my imprisonment. She gazed sadly at the rain, and her eyes began to pour. Tahar growled in pain and anger, and as if she hadn't been standing by the window at all, she vanished to his side to help him. I stood, unwrapped my stone pipe, and made my way to the entrance of the cottage. I opened the door and used a candle as a light. Gray smoke flowed out into the darkness as the wind and rain howled together, as if to hunt some prey, or perhaps to sing a song with the trees and brush. Chanting horribly, as if some haunted troubadour were monophonically singing sorrowful poems in the night. Several days had passed since we recovered Tahar. We had filled him in on what we dealt with after his defeat. He was surprised to learn how easily Tahari had dispatched them. He even went as far as to say that if she had hesitated for even a moment, that she would have been torn apart in seconds. She scoffed, and I couldn't help but join her. Tahari didn't mention my brother, but I understood. All she thought of was my father. Within a short time, my newfound love turned into something I thought equally impossible. It gave me a new profound form of pain. Unrequited love that translated into misery. I knew it as I watched her speak of him, and yet I couldn't help but forgive her. Her heart desired what it would. I did my best to see her as nothing but an ally. Still, while I sat in the background as they spoke, I felt the slightest bit of resentment towards her. After Tahari had taken my blood for her multidimensional tracking spell, we almost never spoke about anything other than my father. So I had left her to her own worries. She had been having difficulty translating a large jagged rune in her book. She said it was a rune she had never seen before, and she was perplexed. We have your blood. We need nightshade, wheat, and the blood of something reptilian. I can't put my finger on what, but I need to keep searching. Somewhere in this book is the answer. It always is. I looked over her shoulder at the roughly drawn symbols and wondered what they meant. I thought about the smoke Tahari's green fire had made, what it must feel like to have that kind of power course through your veins. I looked over to Tahari, who was buried in her book, as she had been since I woke. Teach me how to use magic. The words felt strange and foreign in my mouth. If you had suggested I'd ask that question to a werewolf before this previous month, I would have laughed and ripped out your esophagus. Predominantly out of hunger more than annoyance, if that makes you feel better. Though it seems to rarely ever matter with your kind. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she placed the book gently on the oak table with a light thump. Her eyes darted from my legs to my eyes. Then she quietly stared at me. Or rather, she seemed to stare into me. For a moment, I knew what it must be like for Crimson to ask me to be a vampire. A squirrel begging a lion for its blood to be a lion. Very few vampires had the gift of magic, and those who did were born with that gift. Unlike your father, you don't have such gifts, and you can't reach them in your state. I pondered that for a moment. The state I was in, as if I could change what I was. What can I do to achieve this state of being? She slid the book further away from her and rubbed her eyes before she studied me critically once more. I'll tell you, child. I warn you, however, that it isn't something you're going to want to try. My kind have no name for ourselves. Some believe Nyx's lie that we came before all creatures in existence and call themselves the firstborn. Others, like myself, call ourselves the beasts. It's the blood of any beast to have magic. The only way to use magic, or to understand the runes, is to have it in your blood. We could try what you did with that monster Crimson. I could give you my blood and we could see what comes. Well, I don't believe that it's very wise. It's your choice, boy. I'm willing to try it if you insist, so long as you provide one bowl of pure blood while you still can. With that, she was back in her leather book. I left the room thinking it over. I was proud to be vampire, but the power I had seen so far seemed so alluring. I also found even more resentment for Tahari in that moment of contemplation. It wasn't enough that she had barely spoken to me since I had given her my blood for the spell. She then began to treat me as if I were nothing more than a servant. I scowled at my mud-stained boots as I walked through the cottage. I stepped outside into the cool, crisp spring air. The last of the winter was fading away in this beautiful place, and summer was preparing itself. I had been vampire for a little under 500 years. I had grown familiar with my strengths and weaknesses. At the same time, I had also always been alone, lost in a black ocean that prevented me from seeing an inch away from my nose. This change would bring me closer to a species that still lives, away from Earth and away from humans. It would also be abandoning my people. It was a decision I couldn't make lightly. Tahar was slamming an axe into a log, making firewood for the night. I grabbed the spare axe from the shed and started helping him. We didn't speak, and when we finished, he only nodded at me and carried the wood with both hands to the cottage. I wandered around the rest of the day, searching through the forests and climbing hills to see the views. For the first time in my life, I felt safe, at home. I found a human who had broken its ankle trying to climb down a particularly steep hill. I snapped its neck and carried it back to the cottage. Tahari didn't remove her eyes from the book for a moment. She simply reached into the human's chest and pulled out its warm heart. She took a small bite and set it down on a rag next to her. Tahari and I gorged ourselves on the rest. Days had gone by, and Tahari still couldn't translate the rune. Tahara taught me how to play chess during this time. It was a dull game, but at least it helped us avoid the constant boredom, and was a reprieve from the tedium of chores. I read everything they had to offer. Most of it was about Terra, our planet's history, as they call it. The rest seemed to be various histories of worlds in Tahari's universe. One book spoke of a monster from our universe that had been fighting Nyx off since before Terra formed. It's unclear in any of the books what it is exactly, but it is very clear on one fact. The being is ancient, from the beginning of time ancient. The book spoke about the creature's immense power, how it could wipe out armies with the swipe of its hand and an incantation. It all seemed rather far-fetched to me, but like most mythical boogeymen, who could say? If the rest of this insanity was real, why not some cosmic godlike creature too, that ran around acting as a superhero? One of the last books I read was one I had been saving. It was a book on Tartarus, and the more I read, the more impressed I was with Tahari. How could anyone have made it through this? Rivers of lava flowing like an endless taunt to your thirst. It said that Nyx had created the planet herself and had made it so that anyone or anything that stepped onto the planet would never die or thirst, but would forever feel parched. Would never die of hunger, but would always leave one feeling starved. I read page after page describing this place of torment and cruelty. It later read that in the early days of human history, and during the first empire of the Vampire, Nyx opened a portal somewhere in the Aegean Sea to Tartarus. Hydras, cyclops, harpies, and many other terrible creatures burst forth into Terra. I found that many of the mythical monsters in old times had actually been on Terra after all, coming from the other side. It explained that this was the reason why the Vampire taught the humans to fight. They needed the numbers to defeat the invading horrors. The portal was named Charybdis, and was confused by humans as being a monster itself. One particularly brutal monster known as Skyla guarded the portal at the command of Nyx. In the end, both were destroyed by the Vampire. How is unclear, but they killed Skyla and closed the portal. It took centuries to kill all the monsters that came through. The book claimed that it was very likely some remained on Terra. I know what we need. Tahari did not sound relieved or excited. Instead, she sounded rather miserable. I wanted desperately to hate her and not care, but I found myself unwillingly concerned for her worry. What is it? You sound like we need to fight one of the hydras from this book. Part of me was hoping she would say we did, if only to see such a legendary monster. I set the Tartarus book down. It's much worse than that. It's so very much worse. We need the blood, straight from the heart of a dragon. I was surprised to hear this, but rather excited too. None of the books had spoken of dragons, or even the Shadowlands. No doubt Tahari kept these in her chambers to study before we went to the land of fairies and dragons. Where do we find a dragon without going to the source? I asked, hoping to hear Tartarus. It was foolish, but I had grown to yearn for the challenge. The book had also mentioned 2 dragons being kidnapped by Nyx. One of them had been something called a life dragon, but didn't specify beyond this other than to describe one of the imprisoned dragons as golden-scaled male. The other as a common female of the species was taken as a tax from the Shadowland, as Nyx had told the Dragon Council. It was either lose these 2, or she would obliterate the entirety of the Shadowlands altogether. The choice was simple for them. I know with certainty that one is left on Terra. I found it in the beautiful Gobi Desert. You see, the book you just read explains about the Aegean portal. It doesn't explain that at the same time the Vampamir of the East were dealing with an invasion from the Shadowlands. Though many fairies spread worldwide, the dragons predominantly stayed in Asia. I had been searching for your father. It was a few centuries after he had left me behind, and it was during that time I found this spell book in the ancient Vampamir temple in the Gobi. Had I known I needed the monster's blood, I would have taken it then. It was a bloody fight, and I managed to escape with my life by imprisoning it with a freezing spell. I don't have a clue if the spell is still in effect, but it's highly doubtful. I fought my way through Tartarus, and that dragon is still the worst fight I've ever been in. This is going to be a rough trip. She rose to her feet and started walking out of the room. Wait, how did the Vampamir of the East stop the invasion? She stopped and looked at her many books. For once, she didn't seem irritated by my question. The same way they did in the West. The portal to the Shadowlands was in the heavens, and the portal to Tartarus was deep in the depths of the sea. So both were impossible to be close enough to use the proper spells to shut them. In the end, all they could do was put a barrier around them. Anything that stepped through would have every cell in its body burned away. She briskly walked outside after emotionally answering me. She made me feel love and pain all at once, for no matter how I felt, her cold, bitter eyes told me just how little she felt for me. As though I were a bug to be crushed if proved to be useless or bothersome enough. Despite my feelings, I needed to escape this cage. Still, I understood just how much more I needed magic. After all, my strength had improved enough in the recent seasons. These thoughts repeated in circles for several hours, and I sat down staring out the cool window to think. I watched as Tahari and Tahar started searching for ingredients to create a portal. They soon returned with the oddest of things: a white mountain flower, a little fox blood, and a sprinkle of fairy ashes. Tahari, I called her as she was about to leave the house. I've decided to try taking your blood. Between dragons and hydras and fairies, I feel outmatched. I want to even the odds. You have my blood. You no longer need me. If I die, then I die. What do you say? She looked for a long moment, but when it passed, she nodded her head. Tomorrow we'll start the process, but I warn you, taking my blood will be the most painful thing you ever do. If you emerge on the other side insane, there's no telling if Tahar and I can stop you. I have no fear of anything that wishes to fight me, but it wouldn't mean you won't kill me. A Vampamir mixed with a beast is a terrible thought. Truth be told, it sounds like it belongs on Tartarus. With that happy note, she left to prepare the ingredients. Before the sun even peeked over the hills, Tahari was shaking me awake. Get up, boy. This will take several days and we need to get it done as soon as possible. I rolled myself to my feet and followed her out into the dark early morning. She had 3 bowls of blood on the table. I reached for one and she shoved my hand away. Don't be a fool. Drinking it would only make you sick. No, the only way this is going to work is with magic. Stick out your arm. I did, and she cut my vein vertically. Before it could close, she snapped her fingers, and it split wider. I gasped in pain as blood flowed into the air and onto the ground. I fell to my knees as I felt my body grow weaker. Suddenly the blood stopped, but the wound stayed open. I watched as the blood in the bowls arose into the air as well. A bit of my blood flowed out of me and into the mix. It bubbled a bit, and Tahari started chanting a spell. It lasted for several minutes, but I was too exhausted to pay attention. Suddenly the blood shot into my veins. My body felt like it had been covered in ice. I tumbled to the ground as the last bit of blood went into me, and the wound closed. I gasped for air and wriggled on the floor in agony. Tahari grabbed me and pulled me to her. She held me tightly, and despite how much pain I was in, I still felt a rush go through me at her touch. The pain went on for hours. The sun rose and Tahara stepped outside chewing on a piece of liver. He saw me screaming and laughed a bit. Then I faded into the pain, coming in and out of consciousness. The suffering dulled down after a while, yet my body felt as if it were at war with itself. Finally, I slipped into unconsciousness and didn't come back. But my dreams weren't any better. I sat in the middle of a vast field, surrounded by the bodies of hundreds of thousands. Blood and death filled my nostrils like two old friends. In the distance, whatever battle that had raged continued between the two armies. The ground was dark and muddy with blood, and the sky seemed to be on fire. "Why do you fight it?" A monstrous voice growled behind me. I turned to see the most horrific beast. I knew I was looking at myself. The beast stood at 370 centimeters tall. Its white fur shone and danced under the fire in the heavens above, and its bright blue eyes glistened with the distinctive glow of an animal in the dark. Menacing and cruel were the teeth in the creature's mouth, but it was the power I felt radiating from it. The same power I had felt from Tahari the first time I had met her. It was that power that made me walk towards this monstrosity, that seemed even more horrifying than Tahari or Tahar in their bestial forms. "I'm afraid." I didn't know where those words had come from. It was like watching from afar. I knew they were the purest truth I could provide. "You brought us together. You and I can kill each other, or we can change it all. Take the fight to Nyx for what she did. Kill them all one at a time. Or we can keep fighting, and your vampire form will die, and I will go with it. We are one, and need not fight one another. Just accept me into your being, and we will never be severed again." The beast spoke in growls, very different from Tahari when she brutalized Crimson. "I accept," I said to the beast in nearly a whisper. Fear was all I felt, and I wanted to run from this horror of a monster. Still, I wanted magic, so I gave up who I was and let the creature come closer. "Can you feel it? The magic flowing through you? It feels like pure pleasure, like 1,000 waves of it. You and I will do great things. Our enemies will die in the thousands, just like this battlefield foretells." The creature gestured around us to the masses of dead as the beast began to laugh hysterically. The beast never responded again after that, and I found myself waking up in a sore body resting on my bed. Or rather, half of my body did. The other half lay stretched across the room. Long, thick, white fur coated me head to toe. I raised my hand and thought of green fire. It lit in my palm ablaze, and the fire danced beautifully and harmlessly around my hand. I bounced the flame from hand to hand, then blew it out, creating thick, sparkling smoke. I thought of Tahari, and there she was, a lifelike figure in beautiful blue and gray. The smoke Tahari smiled at me. Then it flew apart as the real Tahari stepped through it, scowling. She was in her human appearance, and she stepped right up to my wide jaws, as though I were normal. She placed her hand on my face. "What's it gonna be, boy? A fight or peace?" I felt a bit of temptation to rip out her throat for speaking to me with such contempt. It went away as soon as it came, but regardless, Tahari felt it. "Never." The beast rumbled. Even with her cruelty, I couldn't bring myself to hurt her, even if I wanted to. "We shall see." My body shrank back into its usual form quicker than I thought it would. I was completely naked. She scowled at me as if I had done this on purpose and stepped out so I could change. I slowly opened my door into the next room. I stretched out my back and legs. I was starving, but luckily for me there were several humans ready. I dug in, and when I was satisfied, I sat and pondered my new acquaintance's words. While I suppose the beast was in fact me, it was hard to see myself as the same thing as that monster. "How long was I out?" I asked as I sat down heavily. Tahari continued drinking her water and staring into the green fire. Tahar looked at her, then to me before rasping a response. "A week," was all he said before returning to his half-eaten food. The others finished their part of the feast soon after, and then pulled a small pouch from one of their packs that adorned the wall of the dining room. It smelled like rotten seeds, yet it was still an alluring scent. I never ate plants if I could help it, but it intrigued me. They pulled out a small emerald-colored seed. It shined, and I could feel the magic radiating from it. It's from a special tree in our world. It causes interesting prophetic hallucinations. We only have 2 left. I want you to take it. This will affect the one most connected by blood to your dear father. That means you, Prince." She pushed the seed to me. My heart started pumping a bit faster. It felt stronger in my chest. I picked up the seed and began chewing. It tasted awful, but I felt the rush. I was taken. I never went far or near or anywhere. I was in the room, always in the room, but so damn cold, always miserably cold, completely lost in the reality of none. Zeros in every corner and millions the next. I floated in the abyss and felt a world colder than the deepest reaches of space. Around me was a vast field of stars that made me stare in wonder. Suddenly I watched every last star glow bright red and then suddenly disappear. Then I felt the pull of the stars being replaced with a far stronger unseen force that was pulling me. Within a moment, I was pulling apart, my body followed by several gravitational shreddings of my soul. Then the pull seemed to vanish as quickly as it came. Free to move, I made my way to the small light in the darkness to my left. I pulled left and ended back in the beginning. Right, up, diagonal, and down did the same. I had been frustrated, bitter and frustrated, to find that after 1,000 attempts and failures, to find that there was only no real way out. That abyss had felt like an eternity of madness, of darkness, from unbearable darkness to peace of darkness. It was unclear. I lost myself there when I realized it was all an illusion. So incredibly darkened was the world kept by the loss of its light, all light, not even a star to protect you. Can you see it? I can, from time to time in my deepest night terrors. The most horrific eternity that never ends. But furthermore, I found myself on an island all to its own, a place of hostility and bliss, a feeling that as long as I remained there, I would be safe. And I saw them. Glimmering red eyes with a copper brow, sharp black teeth shattered by a ball of energy. It falls and rises in the blink of an eye and charges, not even stunned. Blood splatters everywhere, and suddenly the safe place ceases to exist, and I find myself surrounded by every fear, by every thought. The ground moved away, and I could see a dark red lake of fire following behind me. The sky was an open wound, and blood rained down from above. I couldn't see or hear anything but a deep boom. At first I thought it was my heartbeat until the shadows of the mountain-sized figures surrounded me. I stared up in horror and ran as fast as I could. From every side, creatures and dead, decaying hands reached for my soul. Terror was all I knew as I ran through the hordes of undead. I found my way through that bloody mess for what felt like an eternity. Finally coming back to reality only when my neck was bit into by one of the shuffling freaks. I sat in the same place for a long time. My mind needed a moment to find its footing in reality once again. When I came back completely, I told them about the vision of the dragon's teeth being shattered and it not being paused. I didn't mention the undead. I wasn't ready to recall that kind of horror. Tahari smiled widely and rose from her throne-like chair. "That's great," was all she said, not bothering to ask if I was fine or offer me water. My throat hurt, as if I had swallowed a hedgehog. Is it? Is it really?" came Tahar. He sounded angry, as he always did whenever he bothered to make a sound. "Sleep," was the last I heard from Tahari. I immediately fell under her spell and began to drift away, though something stirred within me. I felt as if I could prevent her from controlling me if I chose. Still, I also felt that it would hurt her in the process. So I let myself fall into her grasp. Part of me hated myself for this weakness. Part of me hated Tahari. Regardless, I closed my eyes and flowed into a much better dream than my last, though I couldn't recall it when I rose the following morning. The sun started irritating me. It was warm at first and rather pleasant, but it had begun to annoyingly blast across my black skin, forcing small beads of sweat to form and break from my brow. I sat up and rubbed my sky-blue eyes and ran my hand through my braided snowy hair. As the pleasant haze of rising from a good night's rest slipped away, it was difficult to forget the previous night's hallucinations that led me wandering through horrendous places of seemingly random nothingness. I sat up and felt within for the warmth I had felt as a beast. The pulse of my heart felt like a catalyst, and with a push of will, I formed a small ball of energy into my palm. A shapeless ball of light, it seemed. It was a soft, healing energy, as I had hoped to create, formless and very weak. I rubbed it into my warm skin and felt a jolt of relief flow through my body. At that moment, I was engulfed in the warm flame of happiness. I stretched out my arms and legs while casually observing my surroundings. I walked out of the cabin and found Tahar planting his palm and dragging it across a loose patch of soil. He was mumbling some unheard chant to himself as the lines started shining purple. Tahari stepped from the tree line holding a bright yellow flower of some kind. She dropped it into the circle and it erupted with a massive shockwave. I fell hard into my back. Tahari and Tahar didn't so much as flinch. I was only beginning to rise when suddenly the bright purple symbol rose from the ground like great tendrils. One after another, and yet almost instantaneously, they reached out to me and started dragging me to the center. I grabbed for anything but only found air. Suddenly I was yanked to the other side. This, of course, was unnecessary, but Tahari found it amusing, I'm sure. Not to mention if the dragon was waiting on the other side. I'm sure the bitch wanted me to soften it up before her arrival. The warm sand slid away from where my body landed. The stars above were gorgeous, but different, in the wrong place for that time of year. I looked up to see some rather large dunes around me. Suddenly Tahari landed beside me. She quickly stood and scanned the area. I stood as well and nearly lost my balance. My head was spinning after their joke. My father won't be joining us. He needs to keep the portal open. This is the exact location where I froze that damn dragon. I can't feel its magic, which either means the freeze spell is still active, or we're being hunted. Tahari whispered before she turned into her bestial form, and I did the same, letting the burning fire consume me. I stood 60 centimeters above her, and my muscles were the size of small children. Yet, she looked at me as if I were nothing but a child. She inhaled deeply into the wind. I did the same and found several different smells, far more than I normally would. Miles of scents morphed together and yet were distinct despite that fact. It was strange. It felt like I had never known how to smell, and had just begun to learn. This place feels odd, like I'm in another world. I muttered, and I grabbed a handful of fine sand and let it fall once more down the massive silent dune. Tahari took another deep inhale before she answered. Terra has been under siege since it was formed by the last creator. Different places in it, the Aegean Sea, the skies above the Gobi Desert, the continent of ice, and the forests of many forgotten places. All have been the sites of different and multiple portal invasions. Remnants of the past still hide and hunt those waters and lands. Humans know there's something wrong about them, and even have their own rumors and myths about these portals. Interestingly, those myths are usually children's stories compared to what really lurks in those shadows. She placed her massive hand on the ground, scooped up some sand as well, but breathed into it. Suddenly the sand in her palm began to glow red. She let it fall, and it split into several different directions. The bright glowing lines could be seen for miles, twisting and turning. Suddenly every line ceased, growing dim while returning to Tahari. Only one was left moving brightly in a tight circle. Tahari jerked her hand, and the glowing line shot down, disappearing into the sand. We sat and waited for a long moment. I had no idea if this was real. I still had my doubts. I kept wondering when the dream would end, when the seeds would stop having an effect, when I would open my eyes and find that I was still in that wretched barrel on the Santa Maria sailing towards the other end of the endless miserable world. That time never came. Sometimes I still feel as if it's all been a dream, even after all these centuries. Tahari, in the name of the royal blood our Dark Mother bestowed upon us, you are under arrest, a commanding yet fearful voice shouted. I spun around to see 5 figures step through the purple portal. One was dragging Tahar behind him, once again unconscious. I smirked when I saw his limp form. Oh, what wonderful timing for us. What horrible timing for you, Tahari stated when suddenly the red streak of sand shot out of the ground. It exploded right in the middle of the group and speared red glass into their eyes. The beast screamed in agonizing fury and fell to the floor. I darted like an arrow towards Tahar and yanked him free from a big black-furred beast. I grabbed the beast's throat and pulled out his esophagus. I burst it into green flames and shoved it back into his maw. The flames melted through bone and flesh, and the beast's head rolled down the dune. Tahari leapt into the air and speared down, cleanly decapitating the blonde beast that had shouted at her with her outstretched claw. Tahar revealed that he had been playing dead and ripped his chains apart. He then snapped the neck of the closest beast to him, twisting his head off with a crunchy snap and a twist. He proceeded to snap his jaws at the second closest and chewed out his spinal cord, dropping the beast paralyzed, using magic to prevent him from healing. I dove in front of the last beast before it could get through the portal. I stabbed my hand into her gut and yanked upwards, grabbing a large handful of insides. I then pulled as forcefully as I could. Lungs to her intestines snapped loose from her body with a loud wet smack. I tossed her bloody mess onto the sand and it slid down the dune. I then grabbed her by the head and swung her body in circles. Her neck skin ripped and her body went flying several hundred meters. I rolled the head down a dune as well and slid down to Tahar. I watched as he leaned in and whispered to the paralyzed beast, "Tell me everything you know, or I'll make you wish for death." The beast whimpered in response. He seemed as if he was trying as hard as he could to die bravely, but he faltered in the end. After all he had seen, what we had done to his companions, and what worse we'd have been willing to do to him. We'd been tracking you for several days. When we saw the two of you, then with them depart, we took our chance to use you as a bargaining tool for compliance. But it seems to have been a mistake. We were ordered by Nyx. As soon as he said her name, his eyes clouded over and black slime oozed from his mouth and eyes. Suddenly, the slime started to sizzle and burn through his fur and flesh until all that was left was bone. Nyx doesn't tolerate the weak. She did this as soon as she learned of their failure. Father, go back to the other side and keep the portal open. We still have a The sand in front of us exploded outward. It swirled around us like a storm and smacked into my skin. The remaining sparks of red-hot sand formed back together and hovered in midair. That's when I saw the monster, 50 feet long, with a massive wingspan that had blocked out the moon and stars when overhead. The great bronze dragon shot out into the night sky, blasting black sand from its massive jaws. As the sand came down upon us, it stabbed and burned anywhere it touched. I used the basic and chaotic magic I knew to create a shield around me. It was as simple as envisioning a solid wall forming around me. Tahari shoved Tahar through the portal and did the same as I had, only she spoke a language unlike any the humans invented, and formed a much stronger barrier with strange runes floating about her when she was done. I looked up at the monster as it beat its enormous wings, cutting through the air like great scimitars. It had deep black eyes, and its tongue was bright red, forked like a snake. That was the last I could clearly see, as its wings began to send the sand around us swirling into a blinding, skin-tearing haboob. Tahari shot her red ball of sand and energy into the dragon's face, shattering several of its razor-sharp black teeth. The reptile blasted a stream of black sand in rage, nearly skinning me if I hadn't moved quickly enough. I shot a flash of yellow electricity through my fingers into the dragon's mouth and watched as every centimeter of the Goliath shook. Its eyes glazed for a moment, and it began falling from the sky before it angrily regained consciousness. The great reptile rose back to the sky and took a deep inhale of desert air. Tahari shot forward, and in an instant that shouted an incantation. Suddenly the sand around the dragon turned into molten red and started tormenting the monster, stabbing under its scales and ripping them out viciously. The reptile screamed in anguish as scale after scale was pulled by the sand. Suddenly the dragon plummeted from the sky and had crashed into the dunes. It slashed its wings into Tahari's chest. She fell back onto the floor with almost an unheard growl. Blood gushed and slid down the dune. And suddenly the sand stopped moving against the dragon. It recovered quickly and set its beady black eyes on me. I let energy build into my palms and feet as I stepped forward. Its heart was mine. I wasn't going to let this thing live to see another sunrise. I leapt with every ounce of strength I possessed into its chest. Several scales had been ripped off, and black blood sizzled when it hit the sand. I put every facet of energy through my circulatory system, causing my skin to steam. I slammed into the monster's exposed skin and blasted out the other side, holding its midnight-colored heart. As I fell, I felt my body putting its shattered state back together. The heart was still beating when I crashed and flipped over and down onto an empty, steep dune. The dragon stood still for a moment, staring down at its massive hole in its chest. It let out one last blast of sand. This time thick black blood shot out of its mouth with it. It made one last gurgle and collapsed, fading into the sand and bubbling away. I grabbed Tahari's lifeless form and limped through the portal. The sun greeted me, and I was grateful to see it. The cool soil beneath my padded feet made the pain of healing almost bearable for a moment. Tahari had healed, but was unable to stand from the pain. The dragon's wing had nearly yanked out her spine, and even a beast needs time to recover from that. I wrapped the steaming black heart in a cloth and set it on the ground. I then fell to the floor with a grunt. I turned back to my vampire form and fell into a deep, yet miserable sleep. Minutes later, water slammed into my face. I opened my eyes to see Tahar standing over me, smiling with a bucket in hand. "You did well, young one." Tahar walked away and left me sitting in mud. I stood up and followed him into the house. Tahari was standing over an altar of some kind. The large black heart sat in the middle, surrounded by the other ingredients. Tahari looked at me and winked. She then stabbed into the heart, as the darkest black I'd ever seen drained onto the table. The other ingredients mixed in together, and the dark blood boiled them away. Tahari let gray smoke escape her mouth. It formed a massive castle made of bone and stone. Dragons flew far in the distance. Small creatures scuttled around large purple grass. Blue-barked trees with golden leaves moved gently side to side in the breeze. Suddenly the smoke slipped away, and it was gone. Tahari had tears in her eyes, and her fists held tight. He's gone. Oberon had him, she managed to say. She was shaking violently, and her face showed the worst anguish I'd ever seen her display. My father was imprisoned, or so it had seemed from the little she would say. Just point where and I'll bring him back. Those were the Shadowlands, weren't they? Doesn't matter if it's dangerous, or even if it's a suicide mission. He's my father. I started hastily, not reading her expression correctly. No, he's gone. He's dead. You only witnessed the castle. I saw more. His bones were chained to a wall in a dungeon. He's long dead. My love is dead. The only creature in the universe I would have died for is gone. Tears streamed down her face as the beast formed over her soft and beautiful features. Her wolf-like snout, large bat-like ears, even the crease in her skull, like that of a hound, were etched into my mind as my last sight of her for a very long time. I sat down and stared at my feet. My father was my last hope, the only thing I was hanging on to, aside from my brother, who obviously wanted me dead. My race was now extinct. The vampire were no more. Yet I was beast now, a new life for the sake of power. What had I done? Tahari was shaking violently. Tears were falling carelessly to the cold stone at her feet. I tried to reach for her shoulder, only to be shoved back several meters into the chimney. The stone cracked around me, and my spine had to quickly mend its broken state. After wiping her eyes, she glared at me for a moment before storming away. Apparently, I was no longer worth the air it took to speak to now that my usefulness had amounted to none. Tahar scowled down at the pebbles around my feet, then maliciously into my eyes before a smirk cut across his shredded face. "Go," was all he said before strolling casually to the open front door. He then followed his daughter into the dining room. I stared quietly at the black book of magic Tahari had used for the spell. The pair had left so quickly they must have simply forgotten. The jagged runes seemed to call to me from behind their thin black cover. I didn't think more than a moment before grabbing the book as I scowled at the dining room door. With a single motion, I stuffed the book into my coat pocket, while I lifted my dagger from the table. I slid the weapon along my calf into its leather sheath carefully. Finally, I made my way out of what I had thought of as a sanctuary for the last time. All in all, it had been less than a year, but it had been the closest thing to home in over 400. I stepped through the threshold wondering, would I find my brother? Even if I did, I pondered, would I have to kill him? Or would I travel across the ocean as I intended and forget my past? I decided I'd let fate decide, an old habit of mine when I lose a home. I would simply lose myself to the winds.